All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to the 2021 NAACL D&I Keynote talk by Willie Agnew called Give Your Time to Radical Organizations. I guess before we get started, this is a global meeting, but I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation in Sydney, and sovereignty was never ceded. I'll introduce myself. I'll introduce Queer in AI, which is the organization that Willie and I are both in, and Willie was one of the co-founders of, and then I'll hand things over to Willie. This meeting will be recorded, and there'll be some time for questions at the end. So please note them down in the Zoom chat, and I will cue them. To start off with a bit about me, I'm a senior data scientist at CVS, working a bunch on conversational AI, and doing some work in the ethics of artificial intelligence as well. Based in Sydney, my pronouns are he or they. As I said, both Willie and I are members of Queer in AI. Queer in AI is an organization set up in 2017, started in Europe with a meetup. Our mission is to raise awareness of queer issues within AI and ML. We want to foster a community of queer researchers, and we want to celebrate the work of queer and trans scientists. We're almost 4 years old now, and we're a totally volunteer-run organization. Looking very much forward to the talk. I'll hand over to you, Willie.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, so I'm Willie Agnew, he, him, and this is my D&I keynote. Maybe before I start, the idea of having a D&I keynote at a conference like NAACL is just wild to me. The first Queer in AI, we had to rent a hotel across the street to even be associated with this conference. So I want to give a shout out to Pranav, Luca, Mike, and all the other people on the NAACL team and the years of Queer in AI organizers for making this possible. I'd also like to give a land acknowledgement. I'm in Seattle, Washington, on land stolen from the Coast Salish peoples, which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Puyallup, Suquamish, Puyallup, and Muckleshoot nations. Also, I'm going to speak a lot in general during this. I'm going to say you should or shouldn't do different things in different ways. There are probably valid counterexamples to many of the things I will say. Context always takes precedence. You're the only one who can determine if what you're doing is right or works for you. So if I say you shouldn't do what you're doing, but what you're doing is working well for you, I apologize in advance, and please don't let me discourage you. So when I came to this keynote, I really thought a lot about what I wanted to talk about. And there is another talk that I could have given where I give, kind of a very standard history of Queer in AI, and I talk about workshops and numbers and funding and programs and stuff. And I almost gave that. But as I said, we've worked really, really hard for this platform. And within computer science, we're one of the very few prominent and radical queer platforms. So I think it's important that I use it to say things that I think should be said. This is going to be a really, really upsetting talk. I'm going to talk about police violence, violence against queer people, violence against people of color, hate speech, injustice, and suicide. I haven't really talked about this before, and I was reluctant to talk about this because of the damage this story has done to the impacted communities. I see a lot of my friends and family from Queer in AI here. I think many of you have already heard stories like these. And if you have, I really strongly encourage you to skip this talk and don't put yourself through hearing these same stories with different names. Most of the people who need to hear this aren't here right now, but this talk will be posted on YouTube and hopefully they'll hear it then. And I guess the other reason is that, while I and we have worked really hard, I don't think that anything I've done or am doing or will do lives up to what the legacy of these people demand. So I'm very wary of claiming that legacy implicitly. But as I said, this is a big platform. It is an important platform, and it's one of the few platforms. So I do want to use it. And lastly, before I go in, I just want to give a shout out to the Thrive crisis line. It's a trans and queer-owned crisis line. I've seen what these people do up close. They are incredible. They have saved so many lives. So please, at any point, if you're having a crisis or need to talk to someone, call this line. And I guess to my moderators, also if you need to drop out or mute, that is fine. I will DM you when this is over. So for the first half of my talk, I want to talk about narratives of progress, really before I start talking about why we need radical organizing. So this is Pride Month, and this is a computer science conference. So of course we have to talk about Alan Turing. So here's a really nice narrative progress from the British Prime Minister Gordon Brown on September 2009. On behalf of the British government and all those who live freely thanks to Alan's work, I'm very proud to say we're sorry. You deserve so much better. So I think we all know the contours of Alan Turing's story. He was born in 1912. He's a gay, or was a gay, computer scientist, mathematician, and biologist. He made foundational contributions to theoretical computer science, programming languages, AI, and more. And he was a lead cryptographer for the Allies during World War II. And his work shortened the war by many months and saved countless lives. January 23, 1952, Turing's house was burgled. Turing reports this crime to the police. There's a lot more to this story. I really encourage you to read Andrew Hodge's book, which includes a great discussion of how class factors into this. But during the investigation, the police are at Turing's house, and they suspect Turing of having gay sex, which was a crime then, and they interrogate him on the spot. And he confesses. Turing was convicted and forced to take synthetic estrogen injections. And at this time, estrogen injections were a recent advance in medical eugenics, and they cause sterility, loss of libido, and a wide variety of pretty miserable side effects. Turing was also ostracized from society, banned from visiting the US, and really had his position and ability to be a scientist and conduct research put in jeopardy by this. Around this time, our current Queen of England, Elizabeth II, ascends to the throne. She wasn't that old then, though. 2 years later, in 1954, Turing commits suicide by eating an apple laced with cyanide. 2009, the British PM offers an apology on behalf of the British government. The ACM, the Association of Computing Machinery, which is a broad computer science umbrella group, including for this conference, kind of plus ones this. And on December 24th, 2013, that same Queen Elizabeth II issues a royal pardon to Turing. And in 2017, the Alan Turing law retroactively grants amnesty to people convicted of indecent acts, as Turing was. And in 2021, Turing's face is put on the 50-pound note, which is perhaps a pretty, symbolic demonstration of how institutionalized or commonplace or widely accepted he's become. And almost everyone knows Turing. Almost everyone knows his contributions. Almost everyone knows about his suicide. And there's kind of this broad consensus that suicide was a horrible thing, but we've moved beyond that. We aren't like that anymore. We're better than that now. That was back then. So now back to a little more about me. I came out at 20 in 2014. I was, very confident my immediate family would accept me, and I was lucky they did. Um, I was less certain about my broader friends and mentors, and some friendships were fine and were strengthened, and some ended, and some were irreparably damaged from that. Shortly after, I went to my first queer space ever. I spoke to queer people for the first time in my 20 years of living at Georgia Tech's Pride Alliance. And I'm sure like a lot of you are smiling now and remembering the first time you did this, and it's just delightful, empowering. It's like suddenly you know how to swim or fly or something. Georgia Tech Pride Alliance, it's still around today. It's not too unlike Queer and AI, but with a different kind of place of focus. It's student-led. They have weekly meetings with board games, pizza, movie nights. They have a queer prom. You all probably had similar organizations, hopefully, during your studies. They also did a lot of volunteering and activism, helping homeless youth fighting for gender-neutral restrooms with the university. Things haven't changed at all. Working on gender-neutral housing, pronoun stickers, all that sort of stuff that we do as well. And then also, supporting each other when bad things happened. I'm sure, as you all know, in academia, there's always that professor, that administrator, that class. That's just awful. So helping each other through that. Starting my last year at Georgia Tech and continuing on, Pride Alliance was led by Scout Schultz. Scout uses they, them pronouns and identified as intersex, non-binary, and bisexual. They were a computer engineering major. They excelled in class and were on track to graduate early, which is not an easy thing at all to do in Georgia Tech. I did not excel in Georgia Tech classes. I did not graduate early, although not to say that that is the only way to demonstrate knowledge or academic success. And I think the thing that most impressed me about Scout was how deeply connected to the community, both within and beyond Georgia Tech they were. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to have a variety of asides to kind of comment on the stories I'm telling and lessons that I draw from them. Even knowing how to help is really, really hard. If you're in a place or a space of privilege, such as academia or graduate school, or even a really great job, it's so difficult to even know the people and organizations that need help and that are doing good work, much less be actually connected to them. I think this is something that we work on, we put a lot of time into in Queer and AI. And it's been years and years to build these networks and build this knowledge to be able to help people in the way we are now. But even that said, there's still so much more we could be doing. But Scout was really good at this. Scout always knew, like, this charity needs volunteers. These people really need money. These people really need food. All of our time and mentorship could save or change someone's life, but we just don't know that person. Similarly, our $500 could save or change someone's life. We just don't know that person. And this difficulty really scales. And you'll find that rich philanthropists and foundations are always pretty clueless and always giving very large sums of money to very small numbers of organizations that seem to be rather disconnected from the actual help or the actual people who need help. One way to try and work around this is grassroots and decentralized organization. Help people help themselves. Provide people with money, connections, time, training, wisdom. And this is really something that guides what Queer and AI does. Queer and AI has a lot of money, or not a lot of money, but a lot of money relative to some things, a lot of experience, a lot of volunteer time we can give, a lot of connections. And I'm proud that people have been able to come in and very quickly make use of those. And I hope we can continue and grow that. Of course, this is all predicated on being able to prove that your organization actually wants to help people and actually can help people. And neither of these are necessarily easy to do. On September 16th, 2017, Scout is shot and killed by Georgia Tech police officers. Scout experienced a mental health crisis and called the Georgia Tech Police Department. 4 officers responded. Scout slowly approaches them with a closed multi-tool in their hand. After coming within about 20 feet of the police, Officer Tyler Beck fires a single shot into their chest and kills them. Georgia Tech Police Department immediately begins a campaign of lies, assisted by Georgia Tech and credulous media. Over the next days, news, official reports, social media posts, rumors are rife with mentions of an unidentified man. And Georgia Tech has continued to misgender Scout for years, carrying a gun or a weapon or a knife. On September 18th, after a vigil for Scout on campus, a group of about 50 protesters confronts GTPD at their headquarters. A police car is burned and 2 officers suffer minor injuries. GTPD arrests multiple protesters and will continue to arrest, charge, and prosecute protesters over the coming months. GTPD will also use this as an excuse to bombard campus with emergency warnings to take shelter from potential protests over the next days. And these are the warnings where your phone starts buzzing, everyone's phone starts buzzing, the campus alarm goes off. Very, very intense. On October 12th, Georgia Tech's VP for Legal Affairs, Pat McKenna, says that Georgia Tech plans to fight Scout's parents in court, rejecting an offer for mediation, which included establishing a scholarship for queer engineers in Scout's name. And on the left here, we have a quote from this VP of Legal Affairs, basically saying that they're going to wait for the investigation and see if there's anything they can use to get out of that. And the Scout's father is saying that we just wanted to resolve this in a positive way. In the wake of Scout's murder, and under extreme pressure from arrests and prosecutions stemming from protesting Scout's murder, 2 trans women of color commit suicide, including Scout's former girlfriend, whose last words are, "I'm not strong enough to be arrested." On April 2018, Scout's murderer, Officer Tyler Beck, returns to active duty at Georgia Tech. In March 2020, the Fulton County DA Paul Howard announces that Beck will face no charges, citing 2 use of force experts who concluded that the shooting was justified. So Officer Beck will face no charges, and to this day, Tyler Beck is an officer at GTPD. In all likelihood, this person wanted to work at Georgia Tech this morning. To my knowledge, the only public consequence GTPD has ever faced was when the protesters burned the GTPD police car. So there was a lot of discourse and speculation surrounding this, and there always is when something like this happens. of, you know, we need to reform GTPD, we need to contact certain people within Georgia Tech to just let them know how we're feeling, to explain this to them. We need to wait for, you know, the courts or whatever to work this out. You know, in my experience, institutions are working as they're designed to. This was the outcome that Georgia Tech wanted. Georgia Tech faced no consequences from this. They didn't have to change. They didn't have to pay money to establish a scholarship. You know, it worked out well for them. We should also look at the tactics they used in this. The Georgia Tech Police Department, the institution, prosecutors, and the law worked hand in hand for this. Scout was always presented as another, queer, non-binary, struggling with mental health, a radical. Protests and protesters were emphasized as being violent, as being by people from outside campus, from outside the community. So once again, more others. These cases have dragged on for years. You know, they're still winding their way through the courts. The determination not to charge the officer was only made, you know, about a year ago in 2020. It's exhausting. You know, students will graduate. It's very costly to pursue this litigation. That brings me to, you know, fighting where they can't lose. Georgia Tech has an army of costly professional lawyers and deep connections. They have an immense advantage in the courts over individuals. And the last thing is covering up history. You know, to this day, there's no campus memorial for Scout. Scout isn't mentioned really in official Georgia Tech things. Georgia Tech still has campus LGBTQ+ organizations. You know, they send their tech trolley, which is the symbol of campus, to the Pride Parade, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I'm sure there are Pride flags and statements all over campus every time this year. And I'm sure that if reforms or changes eventually occur, you know, the institution will take credit for them. We'll say it was through our processes that this happened. Which brings us back to Turing. I want to emphasize this point of cover up history and take credit for any reforms or changes. You know, Elizabeth II ascended to the throne in 1952, before Turing died, but, you know, after he'd been convicted. It was only 61 years later that she pardoned him posthumously. But of course, you know, it was a big PR win for the English establishment, that, you know, their queen had been kind and justice had been done. You know, similarly, in 2009, the PM issues this apology on behalf of the government. In 2012, a bill is introduced to English Parliament to pardon Turing, and it's actually blocked by homophobes, by all the people campaigning against gay marriage and other rights. So I guess that brings me to another thing I want to say. And once again, this is probably targeted mostly at people who aren't here live with us. Just because you're right then, or you're right about something now, doesn't mean you're going to be right about everything in the future. Oppression is more vast, complex, and deep-rooted than most or any of us can comprehend. Never, ever stop learning and listening. Never get complacent or arrogant. And, you know, as we all know today, you know, Britain is a center of TERFs and attacking the rights and humanity of trans people. I have a lot of friends that are, it's really horrible what they're going through right now. So they haven't learned, they haven't changed. So I just wanted to say, or talk about this point once more, that institutions are working as they're designed to. Large institutions and the people running them are very competent. They are very smart. They are very hardworking. They've had decades or centuries to grow and learn and refine their practices. In the time since Scout shooting, Georgia Tech has grown its endowment a lot. It's added new buildings. It's opened new computer science buildings. It's brought in many professors, had many companies come to the area and start valuable partnerships. Georgia Tech is thriving by its own metrics. It's doing exactly what it wants to. And similarly, big tech companies, they are thriving by their own metrics. They've grown their share prices, expanded their reach, successfully avoided major regulation or antitrust action. Meanwhile, employee diversity metrics have largely remained flat. Worker rights have been eroded. A variety of abuses associated with these new technologies we're using have been, ignored. So when bad things happen, it's not because these institutions didn't know about the problem. It's not because they made mistakes, or it's not because they don't have the capability to address these issues. These institutions would rather have these bad things happen than change. They don't really care about these bad things, certainly not as much as you care. To my knowledge, Georgia Tech is still fighting a civil suit from Scout's parents in court. But I'm sure they will continue to. And it's probably costing a ton of money to pursue this lawsuit against Georgia Tech. That brings me to another point I want to talk about. And once again, mostly for people who aren't here right now. A small number of choices will probably determine your impact in diversity and inclusion, or just being a good and ethical person. While D&I is daily work, most of the things you do on a daily basis are little things. And these little things can add up, and we should never discount them. But in my experience, there's a small number of big outsized choices that people will make that will determine this impact. Whether to stand up to someone, whether to do the work to really help another person, whether to fire someone, whether to fight for something in an important meeting, whether to take responsibility for the murder of a student. These are the things that will determine most people's impact. So you should be very thoughtful when they do come up. So, this is partly about queer AI. So I want to talk more about how this shapes my own thoughts and experiences. And I think the thing that got to me the most vile thing about this to me was how the Georgia Tech community responded to the murder of Scout Schultz, a Georgia Tech student. So, like many universities, Georgia Tech has a Reddit. It's one of the most popular campus community spots. I think you have to get verified to post in it or whatever. To this day, the second most liked or uploaded post or whatever in Georgia Tech, it's the GTPD appreciation mega thread called "Let's Show Some Support for GTPD in Light of Recent Events," created in the wake of Scout's murder. By far the most liked or interacted post is a message to these protesters. It goes, "Dear protesters, specifically those of you shouting, 'Fuck the police.' You are a disgrace to this school, to the city, to this country. You are violent animals using a tragic death to act an excuse like such." And it goes on and on. And there are thousands of comments saying far worse things about this. And I think everyone in this talk now is aware of all of the dog whistling and tropes being pulled up in this. And what really got to me is that the community started a fundraiser. The fundraiser wasn't for Scout or Scout's family or memorial for Scout. It was for the Georgia Tech Police Department. And in just 2 months, they raised $10,000 for the police department. And you can go through here and you can kind of scroll through, these hundreds and hundreds of small donations that the Georgia Tech community made. Because apparently, when the police department murders a queer person, we should support the police department, not the queer community, the queer person. I don't want to dwell on this too long, but I think it was with this, profound sense of just alienation and disgust was part of how I started Queer in AI and part of how I see Queer in AI's relationship to the wider community. So throughout all of this, a big theme was dehumanization. GTPD could only get away with this. Georgia Tech students could only be more concerned about the police department than about Scout because of this dehumanization. When we do things like not using pronouns, when we protect or tolerate harassers, when we detonate people or build and maintain systems that detonate people, when we accept vast inequities in our institutions, when we ignore or take advocacy work for granted, we're sending the message that some people and their identities and their concerns are just less valid or less important, that they are other, that they aren't related to us, and that it doesn't matter what happens to them. And while there are many, many different magnitudes of this, we still see it a lot today. Google Scholar is very hostile to trans people. Pronouns are still very difficult to get people to use in our community. The idea that inequity in our departments is unacceptable, or that this advocacy work we do is central to research, is still very, very alien to most people. And we can't ignore what's going on in the broader world. We're in the midst of a massive dehumanization campaign against trans, non-binary, and intersex people. 80 bills have been introduced in the US this year alone, targeting access to healthcare and participation in society for trans, non-binary, and intersex children. And here's a really great article from the Seattle Times about Amazon selling this book that says, you shouldn't provide medical care to transgender youth. And we have this quote from Glamazon, which is the Amazon queer ERG, saying that, Glamazon said that Amazon should do this. They fought back, and Amazon just ignored them. Clearly Glamazon doesn't have much power here. Another thing I want to talk about, I guess another way of analyzing institutions, institutional silence speaks volumes. Over half a century after the police and government caused Turing to commit suicide, here we have another queer computer scientist who's murdered by the police on film. Where was the outcry? Didn't we learn from Turing? Aren't we better than this now? It was just silence. Nobody talked about it. There was no organizing about it. Here are my emails from the ACM during that time period. And it's like everything is normal. They even send out an email about their Turing Award talk for that year. Institutions are very cautious and very professional about public communications. They have considered everything or almost everything, and what they don't say often says more than what they do. So, here's ACM's little website around the Turing Award. The word gay doesn't appear there. The word homosexual doesn't appear there. There's no mention of Turing as a queer person or what happened to Turing. It speaks volumes that the ACM isn't saying anything about this, isn't front and center about this. It speaks volume that our departments are quiet to this, that big professors are quiet to this, about what they care about, what they consider important to them, how they see themselves in relationship to other people. So I encourage you, whenever these bland statements come out from institutions, look at them through this lens, and you'll probably discover some interesting things. Finally, this is not an isolated incident. Police brutality happens daily, disproportionately against people of color, people who don't fit neatly into the gender binary, people who experience mental illness, poverty, and homelessness. I could probably spend the rest of this talk just listing off names. And it's this isn't even an isolated incident within the computer science community, within our community. In our ongoing 2021 demographic survey with 118 responses thus far, 59% of people reported mental health impairing their ability to work, to research, to attend classes. 28% reported having seriously considered suicide at some point. And of course, we provided them with crisis resources during the survey. And then 13% reported having mental health crises at conferences. And one of the things that keeps me awake at night is, this could happen again. What if someone is having a mental health crisis at a conference? What if the police are called on one of our Black or brown or trans members or organizers? Nothing has changed. This could happen again. I do also want to say that in another, or I guess in my role with Queer AI, I'm also on the executive board of OSTEM, which has an annual conference every year with about 1,000 queer people, and this is also a very, very stressful time. Many of these people will have different mental health crises, for either reasons at the conference or because of things going on outside of the conference. And OSTEM has established and trained this crisis intervention team, and Thrive Crisis Line came out of that. And they save lives. They basically spend all weekend responding to people having these crises and stabilizing them and getting them help. So I kind of want to hold that up as, there are solutions to this. There are ways that aren't the police to actually address these needs. And I encourage everyone to look into these programs, and especially Thrive, because they offer great training. So that's the first half of my talk. And I want to take a 3-minute break for everyone. So I'll come back at 15 minutes until the top of the hour. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So the overarching point I wanted to make with the first half of this talk is that institutions are doing what they're made to do. That they do horrible things, but they always have their own interests in mind. And that repeated attempts to engage in different ways, whether through the law, through ERGs, through on-campus organizations, have just always failed. And this is the, sorry. So, what do we do in the face of this? How can we affect change? How can we enact abolition? How can we solve all these problems that have led to these tragedies and more tragedies? I don't have a perfect answer, but the best thing I have is to give your time to radical organizations. Don't give your time to your boss, don't give your time to your school, don't give your time to your employer, don't give your time to the D&I committee, don't give your time to the ossified nonprofit that is too conservative to even talk the talk about abolition, regardless of not whether they actually do anything. These people and organizations, they don't share your hopes and dreams. They will oppose anything you do that will impact their money or power. And you're not the first person to try to change them. And their systems have gotten good at handling people like you. I would especially like to point to universities where, for generations, they've been, hotbeds of activism and radical work and radical thinking, yet have remained very, very conservative institutions. And at some point, we got to stop kidding ourselves. If any company was actually committed to equity, they would pay equitably. The CEO and the contractor deserve vacation time the same. Their kids deserve to eat the same and live in good neighborhoods and go to good schools the same. But if you went to a boardroom or a shareholder meeting and said something like this, you wouldn't be taken seriously. You get laughed out of there. It's just it's not even a solution they're willing to consider. Similarly, diversity and inclusion in academia is in crisis. For every marginalized person you see, multiple others have been forced out. It's not about bringing more people in. It's about stopping forcing other people out, stopping doing horrible things to these bright people who want to be in here. But none of these, departments are in this crisis mode. None of them have this urgency to them. So just to reiterate, your government, your CEO, your chair, your professor, the queen, they know what's going on, and they will only help you if you force them to help you. So how can you do that? Build power with people who share your vision. Learn to work together, learn to trust each other, learn to understand each other, and show that you will stand in solidarity with each other. And I really like to emphasize that these are not easy things to do. These take a lot of time. These take a lot of skill just to be able to work with a lot of people and agree to common goals and trust each other. There are a lot of different roles and types of people within radical communities, but we should really respect and recognize organizers who have these skill sets to bring people together like this. You probably don't have much money compared to these institutions, but you have time and skills, which are incredibly valuable. even 2 hours a week is enough to do a lot with many organizations. Many of Queer AI's programs could probably be run on 2 hours a week. And lastly, don't participate in ethics washing or D&I washing. I don't want to say that D&I committees or ERGs are useless, but be very mindful of the limits of what you can do and how you are helping these institutions continue and giving them cover if you do participate on them. So what is a radical organization? Many people know this a lot better than me. There are a lot of amazing scholars and activists and other people who've written a lot about this, and you should read their work. So I will speak in specifics from my experiences. Radical organizations are accountable to the people they serve. And accountability means giving up power and giving up control. Radical organizations give control of their agenda, they give control of their money, they give control of their resources to the communities they serve. One way this can look is boards composed of people who have the greatest need and who understand these needs, and not boards of people, not boards of like retired corporate executives or old politicians or all these boards you see on big nonprofits. Radical organizations are dedicated to their mission rather than their institution. If the institution gets in the way of the mission, the institution should be dismantled and abandoned. So, if a group of people came to Queer AI and convinced us that the best way to serve our community was for us to give them all of our money and disband, we would do it, no question. Everything we built is to serve our community, and if it ever gets in the way, I would happily give it up. Many nonprofits can't meet this bar. They can't meet the bar of doing more good than they would if they just gave all the resources to the people they say they serve. So this is another tool to evaluate which organizations you spend your time with. Finally, be wary of having people make careers out of a nonprofit. While these are very time intensive and people should be compensated for the work they do, if someone's job is a nonprofit, then they suddenly have a very strong motivation to continue and grow the nonprofit financially because it's what's paying their bills. I'm proud that Queer AI is at least somewhat in this space of being able to give up revenue and size to some scale to do what we think is right and what we think is best for our community. And I always hope to continue that. Radical organizations may delegate worker roles, have mentors or leaders, but they seek to avoid power hierarchies. The ideas and needs of any community member should be taken seriously. And being as open and transparent as possible is a great way to facilitate this, to facilitate accountability. They always seek to empower the most marginalized people as well. So, for example, almost all Queer AI organizing takes place in public Slack channels. The boundary between member and organizer is very blurry, and people are often able to very quickly start initiatives or take on exciting roles. Next, radical organizations care for each other and they care for their communities, and they prioritize this care for the people who need it the most. I cannot emphasize this enough. Like if you want to start an organization for a group of people, build it around caring for that group of people, and it will grow and it will do awesome stuff. So for example, we provide grad school fee scholarships to people. We provide travel and registration grants. We provide honoraria. And hopefully in the future, we will continue to grow our care programs. So lastly, I want to talk a little bit about tactics. I don't have the most experience in this. Once again, other people have done a lot more than me, but I will talk about some stuff. So the first thing I want to say is, don't let the people who are opposing your change police your tactics. People are always going to say that something is violent or uncontrollable or destructive if you're threatening them personally. And honestly, like, that's a good metric for saying what you're doing is working. If you're making them uncomfortable, if you're threatening them, they'll let you know, because most of these people are quite arrogant and quite entitled. Figure out where they're weak and you're strong and fight there. The courts probably aren't a good place to agitate for change, unless you get the backing of one of a small number of very large nonprofits. Also realize that these companies have very, very extensive lobbying programs, both at national and at local levels. And certainly be extremely wary of fighting for change within any system for justice or accountability that the organization you're trying to change has designed, because this system is designed to preserve the organization. Public opinion is pretty good, but I'd emphasize you need to do more than just retweet and like. You really need a planned, coordinated, and well-researched campaign. Find the receipts, get a group of people to share and spread these receipts, make reports, make infographics, and you can really light a fire under some people and organizations. Another thing to keep in mind, they do this as a day job. They don't really care about their corporation or their department, but this is personal for you. So make it just as personal for them, and you'll find that they will have a hard time continuing. And lastly, I want to say the receipts aren't hard to find. Look at funding, look at speeches, look at associations, and you will almost always find some interesting things. So on the other side, being a leader, especially in one of these institutions, if you are a leader, you need to be able to create a safe and welcoming organization. Like that's just part of being a leader. It's ridiculous to hear about all these leaders saying how they need to do better or learn or grow or improve around issues of diversity and inclusion. Like that's just your job. You need to be able to constructively handle criticism, even if the criticism feels unfair to you or is unfair. Only you have the inside view, and only you have the power. And lastly, incisive criticism from someone who knows you and your organization is the most valuable and rare thing you can get as a leader. If you aren't receiving criticism like this, the people you lead are afraid of you, or they don't think it'll make any difference. Few last things. The Overton window is whatever you can say. Just go to a meeting, propose your idea, propose your viewpoint, and suddenly it's part of the discussion. Most people don't care that much. It's not personal for them, and they won't go to great lengths to express their opinions. Having just a few loud voices at a meeting or at a protest can really recenter a debate. Compromise is unavoidable. We are all doing it now by just existing within and maintaining these systems. But don't let the people who don't share your dream tell you when or how to compromise. Push those people with everything you have. Lastly, don't let institutions co-opt you. Demand power or compensation for your work. If you're asked to be a D&I chair, ask to sit on the board of that conference. If you're asked to be on a GI committee, ask to be able to attend closed faculty meetings. Ask to be able to vote in those faculty meetings. If you're asked to be on an ERG, ask to attend your boss's meetings about that ERG. So in closing, I'd once again like to thank Queer the NAACL D&I committee, and the many of others who've worked so hard, thousands of hours over years and years to make this possible. I'd like to thank all the mentors, scholars, and activists who've enabled me to dream. I don't know if we have any time for questions, but you can always email me at william.agnew@ostem.org. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Willie, for an awesome talk. I feel challenged, I feel inspired. I guess speaking for myself, it's causing a lot of reflection on the work that I do. I think we have time maybe for one or two questions. So I want to start with one from Milland, which is, on the day-to-day, how do you balance your work that's inspired by your educational training in computer science and your work related to advocacy and fairness, such as Queer in AI and OSTEM. Is there one which you find more meaningful and fulfilling? Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know if I've done a good job of balancing this. Definitely my progress as a AI researcher has been slowed by the amount of time I'm dedicating to Queer in AI. But also, I probably wouldn't be doing a PhD now if I didn't have Queer in AI to support me. And I think I find the work I do as part of Queer in AI and you know, the computer science and AI problems that can come up as part of Queer in AI most inspirational and motivating and inspiring. Yeah, I don't know. This is an ongoing question. I don't know if there is a good way to balance them. I don't know if being a computer science researcher is necessarily the best thing for what I'm trying to do.
Thanks, Willie. Maybe one more question, then, and we can leave it here. So COVID has consumed our lives for the last couple of years. I feel like we're seeing ways forward from COVID. Vaccinations are being distributed and so on. What are you excited to work on within radical organizations as we're able to meet and organize in person?
Yeah, I mean, Queer in AI has always been virtual and distributed. I don't know if there's ever been an in-person Queer in AI organizers meeting, and the same with OSTEM. I've definitely been thinking more about the value of doing activism locally and actually being able to physically do things or physically be around people and how that can let me help people in ways that I can't really virtually. Yeah, but it's still, I don't have much experience about this. But I think other core organizers do.
Yeah, I suppose it's something that we'll all navigate as we enter out into the world again. Thanks very much for your time, everyone. That's all we have for today. Remember to organize and have a great conference.